that description. I thought about describing it myself, but I thought, oh, I probably wouldn't do it much justice. And I think you gave it a lot of justice just now. So thank you for that. And then last thing before I start asking you questions, if you could provide a blurb so our audience has an idea of your writing style, of the story itself, and who the main character Edie is as well. That would be wonderful.
But I did want to thank Skylark for having me. First, like, this is really, really wonderful. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Faramola. And congrats, Faramola, on Oxford. That's
huge. Thank you. Congrats to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone who's listening. So I am going to read just like the kind of, I'm gonna start from the beginning, then I'm gonna stop. So I'm gonna read a few pages. The first time we have sex, we are both fully clothed at our desks during working hours, bathed in blue computer light. He is uptown processing a new bundle of microfiche, and I am downtown handling corrections for a new laboratory detective manuscript. He tells me what he ate for lunch and asks if I can manage to take off my underwear in my cubicle without anyone noticing. His messages come with impeccable punctuation. He is fond of words like taste and spread. The empty text field is full of possibilities. Of course, I worry about IT remoting into my computer, or my internet history warranting yet another disciplinary meeting from HR. But the risk, the thrill of a third pair of unseen eyes, the idea that someone in the office with that sweet post-lunch break optimism might come across this thread and see how tenderly Eric and I have built this private world. In his first message, he points out a few typos in my online profile and tells me he has an open marriage. His profile pictures are candid and loose. A grainy photo of him asleep in the sand, a photo of him shaving, taken from behind. It is this last photo that moves me, the dirty tile and soft recession of steam, his face in the mirror, stirring with quiet scrutiny. I save the photo to my phone and I look at it on the train. Women look over my shoulder and smile, and I let them believe he is mine. Otherwise, I have not had much success with men. This is not a statement of self-pity. This is just a statement of the facts. Here is a fact. I have great breasts which have warped my spine. More facts. My salary is very low. I have trouble making friends, and men lose interest in me when I talk. It always goes well initially, but then I talk too explicitly about my ovarian torsion or my rent. Eric is different. 2 weeks into our correspondence, he tells me about the cancer that ravaged half his maternal family. He tells me about an aunt he loved who made potions with fox hair and hemp, how she was buried with a corn husk doll she made of herself. Still, describes his childhood home lovingly, digressions of farmland between Milwaukee and Appleton, the yellow-breasted chats and tundra swans that would appear in his yard looking for seed. When I talk about my childhood, I only talk about the happy parts. The VHS of Spice World I received for my 5th birthday, the Barbie I melted in the microwave when no one was home. Of course, the context of my childhood, the boy band, the Lunchables, the impeachment of Bill Clinton, only emphasizes our generational gap. Eric is sensitive about his age and about mine. He makes a considerable effort to mend the 23 discrepancy. He follows me on Instagram and leaves lengthy comments on my posts, retired internet slang interspersed with earnest remarks about the light falling on my face. Compared to the inscrutable advances of younger men, it is a relief. We talk for a month before our schedules align. We try to meet earlier, but things always come up. This is just one way his life is different from mine. There are people who count on him, and sometimes they need him urgently. Between his abrupt cancellations, I realize I need him too, in a way that makes my dreams delirious expressions of thirst, long stretches of yellow desert, cathedrals hemmed in dripping moss. By the time we set out for our first real date, I would have done anything. He wanted to go to Six Flags. So I think that's a good place to
stop. I love that intro. Actually, when I first opened your book, it wasn't in the intention to really get started. I just wanted to get an idea of what it was about and stuff like that. But then I read one sentence and then I read the next, and it's like I could not stop. And I realized, oh, I guess I have started the book. So that's a great intro, and I hope our audience has the same sort of reaction that I did when I first opened that book. So thank you for reading that to us. Are you ready for some questions now?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, let's do it. All right. So, first of all, you have since been initiated into a class of authors that I like to call the PPA, also known as Pandemic Publishing Authors.
Sure.
Um, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to publish a book in the midst of a global pandemic?
It's very strange, you know, because I think that even though we're kind of removed from the moment where we're all kind of scrambling and trying to improvise and figure out what was happening, there's still an element of processing this while also publishing a book. And in a way, like, to be honest, and I feel like most writers are saying this, you know, that it feels strange to talk about your book even during a moment of such kind of you know, where there's a huge human toll, and it's kind of, we're dealing with these big existential questions. But I feel really heartened that people are still really willing and generous with books and wanting to escape into those imagined worlds, as I do. I think I kind of that is one way I've been coping with this moment, is I've been kind of escaping into those imagined worlds, and also painting a bit. Yeah, it's a very surreal experience.
Absolutely. It's definitely not something I'm sure you anticipated when you first started writing your book, no doubt. But I think saying that it's both strange but also humbling, I think is a great way in which to sort of describe how publishing a book during these strange times happening. I don't know. I can't think of any other way to describe it. So let's start. So going into the book, the very cover itself. I'm curious, how did you land on the name Luster for your book title? What was this a title that came to you organically, or was it something you were wrestling with for some time before you landed on the title itself, Luster?
So the title, I mean, when I was writing this, like when it was just a Google Doc, you know, the title that I had was not super great. Like that was one of the things, like as I was writing it, I was getting really good feedback from like my cohort in the MFA, but the thing that would always come up with was, what's with the title? You know, like I knew eventually in the process I would have to change it. And when I started working with my editor, Jenna Johnson, we kind of put our heads together and we came up with Luster, which is, you know, in a way a little punny, right? Because of luster and paint, but also, you know, lust and desire, and sort of maintaining that. How you maintain that luster even of the body when you are like Edie and you're kind of up against a number of kind of impediments in the pursuit of your art, and also involved in these relationships which are brutal and transactional.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way you describe it makes certainly it helps me to realize that I can't think of any other title for this book except for Luster. The fact that it has the word lust in it, the fact that the meaning of it, its application to Edie, our main character, it's perfect. So you and your editor did an excellent job with that title. And so speaking of words, I have a word sentence question for you regarding your book. So from the very first sentence of your book, which we just read, listened to, the audience realizes that Edie leads a messy existence, making questionable life decisions along the way. Yes. However, I noticed that your writing also depicts a sort of griminess about her environment, almost an extension of her life. Certain words such as tepid, moist, congeal, lukewarm pickles, pervasive salmon, her mouse roach infested apartment, homeless men urinating in public spaces, basically words and imagery that makes you want to wrinkle your nose and cringe. What can you tell us about this world that Edie, this nasty-ish world that Edie is living in?
Right, it sounds like such a vile book. You know, like it's funny when you said the word moist. somehow that was like the most vile of that
Yeah.
sort of gross litany.
Yes.
But I know it was important for me to be candid about the grind, you know, especially because the life that Edie is living is like sort of a, you know, a 23-year-old aspiring artist in New York. You know, she wouldn't necessarily have an apartment where her window doesn't open or there is no window at all, you know, where the mice are tunneling through her bread. It was important for me also, just on a craft level, that you are, as a reader, hopefully, you know, situated deeply inside her body, smelling what she's smelling, feeling what she's feeling. It felt important for me because this book is, or at least I wanted it to be, a sensory and bodily and tactile book. And I think in order to kind of make room for, you know, the more like kind of, how should I put it, the prettier parts, you know, the sort of rare joys that come in between, you also need the grind.
I like that. I really like that. You know, oftentimes I feel like writers, they try to stay away from imagery that makes us cringe a little bit. But I absolutely love that you did that. It made the book a lot more honest, I would say. And it definitely made the bad times bad, but it made the good times even better, for
Exactly.
sure.
Yeah.
It certainly shined a light. It gave it that luster, as you would say, to the scenes that brought more happiness and positivity.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So in an article that I read, you mentioned that you wrote this book with Black women as the intended
Yeah.
audience. However, it must be interesting to write an honest and frank perspective of a Black woman that white readers would also get to experience. I think oftentimes we have to put on a face when operating in white spaces. How were you able to write authentically Black or be secure in your writing as a Black writer about a Black character without tempering yourself or prioritizing the comfort level of a white audience?
So I think, like, when I come to the page, the most important thing is that I feel a kind of freedom to write to the specific, and I mean write toward the grind. Even, you know, like, I don't think that in the writing of this I could have really made space for the idea of the reception of this book, and of a character, of a Black character who's messy, and what that would mean. You know, it had to just, I had to have room to depict a human portrait, and a human portrait includes those dark corners, those contradictions. And in writing, you know, it's funny, I think you, as, you know, like, when you're writing from like a group that isn't sort of allowed as much space, there is a temptation that I've actually carved out this space. A rare thing is happening. I should probably represent well, right? But I didn't. You know, I thought it was more humane to write a story that allowed the character to be human, to be messy, and not, you know, not sort of indulging that. At least, you know, the book itself is very much about the performances that are demanded of her, depending on the room she's in, the face that you were talking about in your question. But in the writing of it, I could not have that face on, you know, like, it couldn't be performance. It had to feel honest.
Yes. Yeah, and I noticed that you weren't trying to think too much about how certain audiences would feel as you wrote. Which I think is what makes Luster an even more important and valuable story, because you were completely honest from the first page to the last, and I really appreciated that. I really did.
Thank you.
Yeah. So speaking of putting on a face while being Black, right? Aria, Edie's coworker, is someone who plays the game well, as you said in your book.
Yes.
However, despite their rivalry, Edie recognizes in Aria a kind of hunger that is reflected in her own face, in Edie's face. She sees this even through their borrowed faces. what is this hunger that you're talking about?
Well, the hunger, I think, is survival, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that these are two Black women who I've, who are within their professional sphere, who I've kind of positioned in opposition to each other, but they're still along the same spectrum of survival. They just have very different tacks of going about it. You know, Arya has opted for hyper curation. You know, she is sensitive to a very real, almost impossible standard that I think a lot of people of color understand, which is that the margin for error is very thin. And so how she's able to be at work, her being is more a kind of sterile professional avatar, which, you know, I can relate to, and I think a lot of people, you know, can relate to. And Edie, you know, she's kind of trying to take pleasure where she can, right, at work, in a way that is maybe, you know, those aren't maybe the best choices, but that too is the human response to an environment that is deeply restrictive and deeply flattening, and also not super meaningful work. So her response to that demand is to opt out, and so they're opposed in that way. And I wanted to be careful around this, you know, be careful about kind of holding up a correct idea of Blackness. You know, I wanted to allow for kind of different ways of being, different tactics of survival to exist alongside each other. And in the case of Arya and Edie in this, you know, at work, who they might naturally be they might be naturally friends. They might find some purchase in each other, but they work in an environment which kind of includes that. So there's a sadness in that too. And two Black women who are trying to survive in this environment, who see each other but also cannot see each other. So that was, you know, I wanted to talk, you know, kind of bluntly about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy how even in the workplace, it's survival of the fittest for these two young women. And that's certainly sad, but it does add a sort of wild element to Edie's workplace and working in publishing and whatnot. It adds a wild element. It's like every woman, every man, every Black woman for herself in this context. And so, I'm very familiar with this face that they're both putting on and the hunger that they're putting on. So going further into this idea of putting on a face and this hunger and whatnot, I feel like I think with that, along with cultivating a face, Black folks in general have codified an unspoken language. At times, Edie shares this unspoken language between the other Black characters in the story that she comes to interact with, whether it's with her first lover, Clay, from her hometown, Arya, who we just spoke about, young Akilah, or even Robert, the Black teacher at Akilah's Taekwondo practice, right? What is this language that Edie occasionally finds herself communicating so fluently in when she comes across Black individuals?
So I feel like these run-ins often happen within environments that in which they are not, neither character is adequately witnessed. Like with Arya and Edie, they happen to be working in an environment where they're kind of held to this almost impossible standard of performance. You know, Akilah's Taekwondo teacher too, you know, she sees them across the room and imagines what their life would be. But it is the acknowledgement, I think, in that moment, right, that they are still performing. I think it was like, here we are being softly Black, you know, in public, you know,
I like that.
a kind of a language of containment that is being acknowledged silently. And with Akilah and Edie, which, you know, takes the most page space, that first moment of recognition is very much about that shared isolation that they have. She sees a girl who is moving almost invisible through her environment. She, you know, because Akilah mentions it, she sees a girl who does not live in a neighborhood where there are any other Black people, and she
Right.
understands, you know, how isolating that is. And
Yeah.
I think because Edie too is a lonely character,
Yeah.
that resonates with her. Right, there's a loneliness to performance. I feel like in these moments, the language is as much about the recognition of that performance as the mask slipping down, you know?
Just for a split second,
Yes.
right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that I really like how you said being softly Black, with Edie's interaction with Robert, though brief. They don't know each other, but when they do exchange that look, it's almost, not to sound cheesy, but it's almost like the world stops and they can be real for just a second.
That's right.
And exchange some level of communication through just a simple glance.
Right, and also like that is, I mean, that's really real. Like
Yeah.
you're out and about and you're one of 2 or 3 Black people in the room, you look at that person and you acknowledge them that they're there.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Exactly. It's almost like the chin lift,
yeah.
you know, yeah, the chin lift, 2 Black people seeing each other on the street and they
Yes.
lift each other's chin. They don't know each other, but
That's right.
they see each other and then they keep on walking. It's
That's right.
definitely like that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so throughout the story, Edie is unapologetic about the series of self-destructive mistakes that she makes. I think that at one point, Rebecca is Eric's wife, and Eric is the man that Edie enters a relationship with. Rebecca says, "No, you're not," when Edie apologizes about something. In addition, Edie does not conform to the concept of the stereotypical angry Black woman, whose anger is considered loud and bombastic. She has a lot of rage, and justly so, but it does not manifest in a way that we would expect. So first, why is it important that as a female Black main character, Edie is unapologetic about all of her mistakes, especially in a world in which we're sort of expected to apologize about a lot of things?
Yeah.
And then secondly, in writing Edie's character, why was it important that her anger manifested in a different way rather than the kind of way that we see, say, on television, where the Black woman is just angry and loud and, like I said, bombastic?
So I would say that it was important for me that she make these mistakes unapologetically, because I felt uninterested in indulging the idea that respectability equals humanity, or you know, the benefit of humanity. Like I wanted to write a Black woman who makes mistakes and messes up, and the point isn't the lesson she's learned. You know, the point isn't how, you know, I don't know, how moral or how pristine she is. It is that she is a human responding naturally to her environment. And you know, some of these responses are, you know, they're bad choices. But I wanted there to be also a context around those choices, and I wanted to make sure not to pathologize, you know, that human response to an environment which is often hostile.
Yes.
And I think also, you know, rage is like a fundamental building block of this character.
Oh yeah.
And you feel it because, you know, mostly because this isn't first person, this is an I. And because otherwise, you know, externally, she isn't always saying the things that she's thinking. You know, we're privy to the inside of her mind, and so we're privy to like the unfettered rage that is there. And you know, I didn't necessarily steer her away from like a kind of an idea of anger that I had, because I do think a kind of any emotion in Black women is kind of often coded as anger, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so I, you know, I didn't really even have, how much work did I even have to do in order to convey that. But her rage is as sharp as it is because it is sublimated, you know. And so I wanted to depict what that looks like when it is repressed, and like what that looks like when it is kind of the friction between that rage, holding that rage, and the external performance that you have to do to survive,
Yes.
Is an absurd friction.
Oh yeah.
And so that was more what I was writing toward, to write about that kind of that duality and the brutality of that duality. And I did not mean to rhyme that, but like that was important to me, that in a world where we reward or call a Black woman who bears pain virtuous, it makes it so that we don't afford Black women tenderness and care, so I wanted to show a Black woman who, when she's hurt, she is hurt, and you see that on the page. She doesn't bear pain well or without complaint.
Right. Absolutely. I think it made Edie extremely, extremely human to be able to project the way in which she processes pain as authentically as she wanted to, and it made her all the more human. I feel like if you wrote her as how you would say someone who's virtuous and stuff like that, I think I would even have a hard time connecting with her if she was, if she was strong all the time. Along with being an angry Black woman, there's also being a strong Black woman.
That's right.
The fact that she didn't fit these two molds made her all the more refreshing, and made her extremely easy for me to connect with. Absolutely. So thank you for crafting a character like that. That was, I don't think it was easy, but it was, that was amazing. I also read in multiple articles that said that you wrote Edie as how we read about white male characters sometimes, whose lives are one mistake after another. While reading Luster, I could not help but cringe whenever Edie would do something that you and I would not be able to get away with in the real world without facing the consequences as a Black woman, such as Edie breaking into a house, white suburbia. Like, what was she thinking? Is like, girl, run away, like run the other way. What are you doing? That's what I was thinking. So what was it like to write about Edie making these oftentimes intentional and reckless mistakes as a Black woman, when that is not a reality that you are able to get away with in the real world?
So, I mean, you're totally right. And that is actually a thing I meant to say, which is that that fallibility is something that white men and white women have kind of been allowed to have on the page and in film. It's I wanted to extend that to a Black woman, but I also write that it is there. If there's anything surreal about this text, it is that she is a free, in some ways, right, Black woman who moves through space, kind of guided by her id. That's a privilege that I don't I don't particularly enjoy, right? I feel aware of my body every moment when I'm not inside a place that is safe to me. And so there is an element of writing her that almost felt like wish fulfillment. It felt like the idea of a Black woman, kind of walking freely through suburbs that she doesn't know and letting herself into her boyfriend's house and drinking his milk, and it is it's absolutely naturally, we move through the world with way more consideration because we're often we're not allowed to claim a right to even public space. We see that online in the news, and so in this book, I wanted to give her that superpower. I wanted to watch to write a Black woman who moves these, who is allowed the privilege of having her her desire move her through space.
Yes, absolutely. And superpower is a perfect way in which to describe Edie's blatant disregard for boundaries. And I'm sure just as it was quite liberating for you to write about her being able to do all of these things without any consequences. It was it was liberating for me to read all of that, even though it made me scared for her at the same time. And it also made me live vicariously through her when she was sort of being a bit of a criminal.
Yes.
It was certainly liberating. Okay, so I thought it was also interesting how you intertwined everyday instances of racism into Edie's life. To her, encountering racism was like stepping into the New York subway or finding a roach in her apartment, which was quite often. Something that she lives and breathes, basically, and just deals with. And think about how she encounters racism. Edie says, even though racism is often so mundane it leaves your head spinning, the hand of the ordinary in your slow psychic death, so sly and absurd, you begin to distrust your eyes.
Yes.
Why was it important that you wrote about racism in the small lowercase r sort of way, rather than in that big uppercase R way that we typically think of it as?
Yeah, that was really important to me. And honestly, those sections were really, really hard to write, you know, because I think there's an element of like the uppercase racism, you know, like the really kind of, I mean, it's all catastrophic, right? But like the really kind of super legible, catastrophic events are easy to point to and also distance yourself from. You know, they're easy to kind of say this is a thing that happened at a very far away point in time, and also it in sort of framing racism as a thing that is as hyper legible like that. It doesn't make room for the parts that they're, you know, almost subliminal. They're quiet. They're insidious. And I wanted to, you know, the kind of racism that is in like the mundane, the quotidian, which is, because it is quiet, harder to articulate, harder to claim that are, you know, I don't know, harder to justify as a thing that is real. And I wanted to speak to that madness, right? Because it does feel a little bit like, especially in an environment where, you know, you actually do, you know, it shouldn't be right. And the joke is in the book like this, but the burden is not on the oppressed, you know, to prove their oppression to the oppressor. But like often that is it. You need like footnotes. and I wanted to talk about what it feels like to try and talk about those small, lowercase, mundane moments, when the language around these, you know, incidents is often more conspicuous, is often bigger, and I wanted to show Edie on the page struggling with that, because it is, I think, there's one way to write this, which is that immediately, you know, she knew how to articulate what had happened, and she felt confident in doing that. But I think for a lot of us, even in the moment when it's happening, you're at a loss for words. You know, like there have been many moments in my own life where I've, you know, had a moment, and like 5 minutes later I think I should have done this. And I wanted to speak to that reality where we're not, you know, we're all kind of also humans who are processing as these things are happening, and what it means, and kind of what it takes to be able to articulate that.
You know, in some ways, I really do think that the small r sort of racism is can be a lot more dangerous than the big R, which is obvious and very dramatic and clear as day to us. And right. I really, really like the way in which you articulated the small r sorts of racism, and the way she sort of implemented it into her stream of conscious. She'd be talking about when she was at Eric and Rebecca's house, she was describing, I think the outdoors or something, and she saw she was making very very normal observations, and then she said, oh, and then there's this old white woman looking at me at me through the blinds. And I was like, wait, Edie, do we want to like bring it back and talk about that real quick? And I realized that's how she's processing it.
That's right.
Yeah. So
and I've noticed that for Black readers who are who are kind of pinging me while they're reading, like they notice that immediately, that
Yeah.
surveillance. They
Yeah.
notice the violence of that. Like
Yes.
the very moment, the very first instance that happens. And,
Yeah.
and I think you're right. It is more dangerous because it is, because it's harder to articulate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's harder to see.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have another question, and this one is about hair. I want to talk about hair with you real quick.
Yes.
So of course, when discussing Black girl hair, there's nothing quick about it, but we can try. I seriously couldn't help but chuckle whenever Edie would help Akilah with her hair.
Yeah.
And Eric would be taken aback by the new oil and treatment smells that were introduced to his senses, or when Edie or when Akilah changed her hair.
Yeah.
This was certainly uncharted territory for him, as it is for, I think, a lot of white folks. Why was hair somewhat a central aspect of Akilah and Edie's relationship, and why was it important to add the bewildered presence of a white onlooker as the two girls are trying to figure out this whole hair thing out?
So, I think a hair journey is a really personal and long process for a lot of Black women. And I think that it's like I can mark the stages in my life depending on the kind of hair I had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an element of that where I wanted to, kind of indicate where Akilah is kind of in her journey of self-actualization, because, a big part of her and Edie's relationship is, she actually has a kind of reference point to look toward as to what Blackness might be. And figuring out your hair is kind of like, right? It's like maybe it's number two is sort of in that journey. But I wanted to write about those different, like earlier in the book where Akilah has had a relaxer and it's gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like every Black woman I know has had that experience, and it is deeply formative,
Yes.
What that like relaxer feels like on your scalp,
Yes.
and same with like getting your hair braided. These are, that is kind of almost a separate thing, which is like what it actually feels like to sit between another Black woman's knees and like have her, take care of you and tend to your scalp and your hair. It's a real kind of intimacy.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show that on the page,
Yes.
all of these kind of really the beautiful iterations of Black hair, because it's a very rich, like a very rich history. And I thought that was important to talk about that, and to talk about that relationship between two women who are kind of, figuring it out.
Yes, absolutely. It was that those hair scenes, they certainly weren't scenes that I had expected, because I don't expect those kind of scenes to sort of manifest on pages. But I was really grateful for them. Like you said, that experience of sitting between another Black woman's knees and having her tend to your head, and apply these essential oils and stuff like that. And in me and my mom's case, retwisting my dreadlocks and stuff like that. Those moments were very certainly very special to me personally, and I'm sure to Edie, even though she doesn't really like kids, I think she really liked she really loved those moments with Akilah. Really, it's sort of like a rite of passage for Black motherhood and Black daughterhood as well. Another question I have is, so Akilah, she is not your typical 12-year-old girl. In fact, she carries herself way beyond her own years, as in her short lifetime, she has already been weathered by the world. This is counterbalanced by her love for sci-fi, comics, video games, and Comic-Con. She's the geekiest girl out there. So first, why did you write Akilah as a hardened preteen character, rather than a naive little girl that was willingly waiting for Edie's help and guidance as a Black woman? And secondly, why was it important that Akilah was not only introduced as this little Black girl that was dealing with her struggles, but also her passions?
Totally. I wanted to introduce a young character who's also dealing with those questions of legacy in a way. You know, like one of her main you know, one of her main struggles is trying to find roots. It is trying to make sense of what family is, and in that way trying to find where she belongs. And her, you know, when Edie is brought to the home, you feel that, you know, you feel her trepidation because Edie is at that moment a threat to that stability that she finally has. Yeah. And like, it was important for me to show, I mean, she is another like young black woman who is seeking, and I wanted to explore more what that looks like with family. And Edie has some of those moments too. But I also, you know, I feel a real responsibility when I write, you know, black characters to make room for joy, you know, and so like it was important for me to not just have Akilah be you know, a young woman who's caught a lot of heartbreaks and who is defined by that trauma. I wanted her to have Comic-Con, you know, to have something she earnestly loves. And even, you know, she's a teenage character too, and so like she's, you know, surly and she's a bit impenetrable at times. But something like kind of more earnest kernel. Yeah. You know, that felt right. And also I'm, you know, a big geek, you know, fandom is really important to me, and I just wanted to. Yeah. I wanted to.
Absolutely. And I absolutely love that. I personally, and shamefully, I don't know a whole lot about Comic-Con, but reading about it and reading about Akilah's jubilance about it and stuff like that made me want to attend Comic-Con and experience what she was experiencing and geek out like she was geeking out. So Raven, I have questions for days, and to be honest, we could be talking about my questions till the sun comes up, but I don't think Alex would appreciate that. So a lot of folks who are watching this virtual event, they have some questions for you. So I'm going to go ahead and communicate those questions to you now. So first of all, Christina asks, which authors do you read and who do you pull from that has influenced your writing?
So I would say I really, really love Toni Morrison. I really love Jennifer Egan, Toni Kambara. I really love Nabokov. I really love Garth Greenwell, Carmen Machado, and I think I tend to pull from everywhere, and I'm just gonna list like a bunch of poets because I feel like you pick up a poetry book and it is like a shot of adrenaline. And I love Jericho Brown. I love Zadie Smith, Morgan Parker, Claudia Rankin. I just feel a real like clarity and energy in that writing that feeds me.
Yeah, absolutely. Toni Morrison is also someone that I absolutely love reading. I think
she's really it, yeah.
Yeah, she's the real deal. She's the real deal. Yeah, so all great authors, and I love how you sort of blended in different genres as well. That's awesome. It really shows that your own writing is not just conformed to one, you know, genre or one shelf or anything like that. Okay, so Aaron asks, I've seen a lot of discussion of the novel's connections with painting and visual art, but not as much as of the way it uses music. There are so many great passages involving music, from the description of Edie's grandfather's background as a pianist to a hilarious scene of a task Edie had to do for a delivery customer while he listens to Arvo part. I remember that scene. Could you talk about the influence of music on the book or any particular musical artists you consider influences?
So, I mean, I really, really love music. I think ideally one day, like I'm able to write a book where that is central, you know, like, because I just really, really love it. But I don't play anything. I don't have like the technical knowledge that I wish I did. But music, I love it. I love, I mean, everyone says I love everything, but I really, really do. So like you do have the Arvo part in there. You know, you have the Portishead in there. You have the Phil Collins. You know, it's like it was, and you have Donna Summer.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally I feel like this is no surprise, but disco was huge
Yes,
in
yes,
writing this book.
yes.
Like it was really, obviously it's a genre I really love. I think it's really fun, and it's black and it's queer, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I really love trip hop. I think that it's like it's probably the sexiest genre there is. I mean, I don't know, don't quote me on that, but it's kind of like seething and dark.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of gravitate to a lot of different things, and I think because I like to write toward chaos.
Yes.
I think even Metallica's Master of Puppets was like on replay
Mm-hmm.
when I was writing this.
Prodigy.
Like it was really important. For me, it kind of is, that also is like poetry, that shot of adrenaline.
Yeah.
Right toward the kind of motion and speed and chaos that I really love on the page.
Absolutely. I love how you can honestly say that everything, it's all music, really. I love that. And I think that's what makes appreciating music even more special. You can listen to different sorts,
Right.
all different sorts of genres and stuff like that. Okay, let's see. Who else do we have? Okay. Jill asks, what time of day do you write? What do you do when you are struggling to move your stir forward but are stuck? Are you working on something new?
So I'm not working on anything right now. I'm mostly just kind of putting all of my energy toward like the book right now. But I have many books in me that I'm excited to write. When I'm blocked, I'm kind of like of two minds. I'm about to say almost two opposite things, because I feel it's really important to make it a practice where you don't wait for for inspiration to hit. But I think it's important to kind of get those those shitty those shitty words out, because you have to get those out in order to get to the ones that are going to stick. But I also think that you cannot work from a place of exhaustion, and also a place where you feel defeated and demoralized. Like I feel like there's a moment where you have to rest. I think rest is also really important. And so I kind of oscillate between the two, and it's sometimes hard to tell which one to push through or to rest. So I think I opt for rest. But my writing process, at least for this book and for everything I wrote before it, because I had a full-time job and I was in school full-time while I was writing this. I wrote at night. Like I kind of I'd go to work, I'd go to school, and then I'd come home and I'd write until I need to eat or it's time for bed. And so I kind of chipped away at it gradually. And for me, that was kind of painful, because you're always aware of how much more there is ahead that you want to write.
Yes.
But just chipping away at it, getting the words down that you can in those in between hours, I think that was how I was able to get this out.
That's lovely. And that's a great question. Also, it's important to, I mean, we can say that we're going to write this book and stuff like that, but finding the time to do that, but also finding rest is certainly important as well. And then, so from an anonymous attendee in this little webinar that we have going on, possible spoiler, but what was Rebecca's motivation to have Edie move in?
So I think, my intent with that, there are a couple of things. Edie moves in under the guise of helping out with Aquila, which is kind of like a thin and unreal one. Rebecca is wrong about that, but ultimately almost right about that. Yes. So there's that. Rebecca understands that she is not able to give Aquila the guidance that she needs to flourish, and Rebecca, being a character who likes to be in control, is trying to figure that out. But also Rebecca, being a character who likes to be in control, is trying to assert some order around this situation that is becoming a little out of control. Now that she's met, you know, the girl that her husband is seeing, and understands that Edie will simply walk in, you know. So I think it's that she's trying to, her hand is always present in this arrangement. And this is her asserting, you know, even more, or at least trying to assert her power over this situation.
Yes, certainly in an open marriage, it's hard to have any sort of control. But it's weird to say this, but I respect Rebecca for all the finesse that she sort of has in asserting her own form of dominance, and it's certainly it's certainly transactional. She's benefiting from Edie's presence in the house as much as Edie is from being in the house. So yeah, Rebecca, she's not this ignorant wife who's just letting walk all over her. She's, you know, to her this is beneficial to her in her own way. So it was nice to see Rebecca in that light instead of like this villain.
I wanted
that,
to be
you know,
sure
we
to
would
write
expect
away
her to,
you know.
yeah, and I really appreciate you doing that. It really kept all of us on our toes when we're reading about Rebecca and stuff like that. So just a couple more questions before we unfortunately say goodbye to each other. I actually, speaking of Rebecca, I have a question about the occupations of Edie, Eric, and Rebecca. Edie is a managing editorial director for a children's imprint while writing a book. While writing a book yourself, why did you choose to place Edie in the world of publishing? And what integral facts about publishing and diversity were you trying to uncover in placing her in this position? As far as Eric and Rebecca, what was your reasoning behind Eric being an archivist and Rebecca being an autopsist?
Sure. So, you know, in placing Edie in that environment, like I did get to kind of, I did get to write around and have fun with some of the absurdities that are involved in environments that sort of purport to be diverse, or to want diversity and are ultimately kind of exclusive spaces that are, you know, in the business of flattening the lived experiences of the people who populate these stories. You know, like she goes to the diversity table, right, and she sees that you know, the stories that are there are written by people who are outside of the experience that, you know, that is represented in the book. And I think I too, as a writer, felt that pressure of trying to tell a specific story and feeling anxiety about if there was space. And also, like, it's the Aria and Edie dynamic where I wanted to talk about, you know, what it looks like for two professional women trying to make their way in this professional space when they're kind of held to these performances. So I mean, there are a number of reasons why I said it there. Some having to do with my own anxiety as a writer, you know. But I, you know, with Eric, I guess I could say that I have firsthand experience with all of these jobs. You know, I worked in publishing and I worked as an archivist, you know, what Eric does. And that seemed like a good tie-in to a book about art, which is about record keeping. It's about witnessing and putting down, you know, history on the page or on the canvas. And so archival work felt like a nice tie-in. And Rebecca's job is, my mom had that job. She went back to school when I was in high school. And I watched her work and I watched her work with a body and, you know, disassemble it. And it was really miraculous and beautiful. And that too felt like a natural tie-in with art. Since historically that, you know, the study of the body, the use of the cadaver was really central to painting. And also, you know, this book is a bodily book. So I thought, you know, when you're writing a book, you're always looking for a job that might surprise instead of make the reader go, well, of course, you know. So, you know, like perhaps I could have written Edie as a writer, but like I tried to have some variety while also getting jobs that were relevant.
Yes. And I have to say, I really liked the fact that, personally, I really liked the fact that Eric was a archivist and Rebecca was a autopsist. I like those career choices because they're sort of similar in the fact that they investigate subjects that are considered old and expired, and they try to understand these historical subjects further. And so I thought it was really cool that they had these jobs, and as you said, you know, bringing the cadaver to something and figuring out the history of it.
Yeah,
Same
yes.
with Eric, and as being an archivist, as someone who studied history in college, I really selfishly appreciated that. um, I do have a final question. Unfortunately, like I said, we can go on all day, all night, but unfortunately, we do have a time limit to all of this. Question about art. So art is a major aspect of Edie's life. However, throughout the book, it is something that she struggles with, as while she is trying to find her way in the real world, there is also this parallel exploration to find herself in her art.
Mhm.
Can you expand on why, along with life, Edie is always gasping when it came to her art?
So, in writing about art, it felt really important that I'd be writing about failure. And like I think failure is like a really like that's a heavy word because it almost puts the onus on the person who's failing.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about what that looks like to fumble forward in your art, because it at least has been true for me that the road toward claiming your art is really jagged and strange, and it is full of impediments, some that are beyond your control and some that are have to entirely to do with your own self-sabotage, and then I wanted to speak to that, the messiness, the unruliness
Yeah.
of that, because that to me is liberating, to hear stories about artists who like messed up, on their way, like a lot.
Yes.
And I think that what was the second question? I feel like
Can you expand on why, along with life, E is always gasping when it came to her art? That was like the only question
yeah,
regarding.
yeah, I think that, yeah, that's basically
Yeah,
what I'm going to say on that. And also just I wanted to depict um, what it looks like to pursue that art when you're
yeah,
also balancing like the
yeah,
demand of living.
absolutely. I really felt like your Edie's the way in which I visualize her art is sort of the way in which I understood your writing in a way. It was um, I don't know how to describe it, but I really think her writing and your writing and her art sort of worked in tandem together. They certainly worked together, and I really appreciated these two levels of creativity working together. It was really, really cool to experience that. And so I'm about to invite Alex back in, but I am going to cheat because I do have this personal question that both my mom and I have.
Yeah.
Real quick, I'm sorry, Alex. I noticed that you mentioned, real quick, I noticed that you mentioned Trinidad and Tobago and the West Indies
Yes.
a little bit in your book. And for example, you describe Aria, her Black coworker, as having Tobagonian eyes and apple cheeks, and then Edie's grandfather is from Trinidad.
Yeah.
Just a selfish question: is the West Indies personally significant to you in any way? I asked
Oh,
because my grandma's from Trinidad, and so it was really just cool to see those words
incredible.
on paper.
Yes. I mean, definitely. I that's my family is West Indian, and I actually realized I have an uncle in the family who's really, really into ancestry, and I used to work at ancestry.com, so I never looked it up myself, but um, I actually know what the name of like the ship that my grandfather like he
Wow.
immigrated in like the 30s
Wow.
over here. He came to New York,
Hmm.
much like Edie's grandfather. Like he
Yeah, yeah.
trained pianist, and he came over on a ship, and the name of the ship was called Narissa, which literally translates to raven hair. So yes, I am. I have roots in Trinidad and Tobago, and so I did play.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. I'm
Right?
so glad I asked that question. Well, that's really, really, really cool. And that just sort of shows how like in Luster, Edie and how who she is sort of goes back to like her own grandparents, and in your case, your very name goes back to your grandparents and
Yeah.
roots in Trinidad. That is really cool. I'm gonna tell my grandma about that if you don't mind. So that sort of wraps up all the questions that I have for you. Like I said,
Oh, this
I
was
have a lot of
wonderful.
questions. Yeah. And so if someone ever starts a fan club for you, it's probably going to be me.
I'll join.
So it's probably just going to be me. But thank you so much for this
Thank
discussion.
you.
I wish you the best of luck. Congratulations on all of your success. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Alex. And thank you so much, Raven. It was so great talking to you and meeting you.
This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time and wonderful insight. That was very, very enjoyable. Raven, Faramala, good job. Thank you. Thank you so much. Everybody who's still watching, we love to do these online events, but in order to continue doing them and putting them on, we really do need your support. As you know, these are unprecedented times. It's actually our second birthday next week, and we realized this morning that we've actually spent a quarter of our life as a shop with our doors closed to the public. And it feels like a little bit of a miracle that we're still here at all. But we really would appreciate it if you would support us and purchase a copy of this wonderful, wonderful book from us. Again, it's mail, it's skylarkbookshop.com. Just leave your phone number there, and then we will give you a call in the morning and we will take care of things. Again, thank you both so much. Hopefully we'll see you next week. I will be talking to Peter Guy about his novel Northernmost. See you next week. Thanks everybody. Thanks again. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, Raven.
Bye.